My name is Jason Rufault, and I'm going to be your instructor for today's webinar on entering our expense transactions and also recording checks, bills, anything really that has to do with vendors and spending money or owing money. Now let's talk about what's going to be covered in today's webinar. So first, purchasing workflows, checks, expenses, and bills. We're going to talk about the differences between those, when to use one versus the other. We're also going to talk about number 2, which is accounts payable. Accounts payable is a record of what you owe to your vendors. So whenever you enter a bill, which is a record of you owing something to a vendor, that account goes up. And whenever you pay it, that account goes down. We'll talk about that. Number 3, we'll talk about checks. Now we're talking about like physical checks, things that you can hold into your hand and also potentially print out of QuickBooks. So we'll be talking about that. Number 4, we'll talk about online banking, in which we will be downloading some new transactions into QuickBooks. We'll be adding those transactions. We'll also be matching them. We'll talk about some credit cards, how those are downloaded, and so a whole bunch of great stuff. We'll be talking about all that. And then number 5, we'll also talk about capturing receipts outside the office on the mobile app. So we're not going to spend too much time on the mobile app, but we do want to make sure that it gets covered. So I've got a short little presentation to do for you on that one. So that way you can take pictures of those receipts and get them logged into QuickBooks really quick and easy. So I'm going to go ahead and put myself up towards the top of the screen. And I'm also going to enter my office here. All right. And then we're going to go into QuickBooks Online. So I think we're all set, ready to go. Now, before we talk about anything regarding spending money, it's a good idea to talk a little bit about the vendors list and also how you're going to set up the people that you eventually pay or owe money to. So let's take a look at that really quick. I'm going to go over here to expenses and then click on vendors. So the vendors list is a listing of all the people that you spend money with, and except for employees. Employees go on a different list. So these could be people that you purchase things from. This could be people who are non-employees that you pay for a service, like contractors. They all go on here, and QuickBooks collects information about them, such as their names, their phone numbers, their addresses, their contact information. That way you can dig it up really quickly later on. Also, it helps you fill out transactions a lot more quickly, because if you fill out their information ahead of time, whenever you go to fill out bills, expenses, checks to them, QuickBooks will help to fill that information out very quickly. So right up here, entering a new vendor is very simple. Just click the new vendor button, and right in here we can enter information about the vendor, like their company name, their address, print on check as, email address, things like that that are helpful to have on hand. Also, if you end up using the QBO mobile app, all of this information is also accessible from the mobile app. So if you want to bring up your mobile app and look at the contact information or the address of somebody that's a vendor, it's really helpful to enter that information in right here. That way it's easily accessible later on. We also have some information down here like account number. Now, account number has to do with the account that the vendor has assigned to you. So this is basically how the vendor knows you. And this number is also automatically printed in the memo section of all the checks that you print out of QuickBooks for that vendor. And then we also have this little checkbox, tracks payments for 1099, and also a little field for the business ID number. So if this is a vendor that you need to track for 1099 purposes, you can check off that box. That way it makes it a lot easier later on whenever you go to generate those 1099s. QuickBooks knows who to look for. Now, in terms of entering transactions, once those vendors have been set up, there are a couple of different workflows for us to go through. And I also want to mention that you can, of course, set up vendors as you record these transactions. It's just a little bit faster and easier if you set them up ahead of time, if you want to have that contact information in QuickBooks. Now, I've got a little workflow to show you, because it is important to get the actual flow of these expenses correct in order for us to get the most out of QuickBooks and also its reports. So we're going to talk very briefly about the different ways to record expenses, when to enter checks, expenses, and bills into QuickBooks. Now, all of the transactions that are regarding money out need to be entered into QuickBooks basically by us asking ourselves a question, which is, does the vendor give us a number of days to pay? Yes or no? Now, this question is pretty simple to answer because whenever we buy something, do we pay the person right now as soon as we buy it, or do we pay them later on? That's the question that's being asked right here. So in the case of like utility companies, we don't pay them right away. They send us a bill and they tell us how much we owe. We pay them later on. Or if we're going to a grocery store, it's a little bit different. Whenever we go to a grocery store, they're not going to give us a bill and say, hey, you can pay us in 30 days. No, they want their money right then. So that would be falling into the situation where the vendor does not give us a number of days to pay. So that's the main question right here. Yes or no, are they giving us any time to pay what we owe? If the answer is no, we then have to ask ourselves another question. Are we paying this with a check? If the answer is yes, and by check I mean a physical check, something that you can hold in your hands or print out of QuickBooks. If the answer is yes, then we're going to use the check form. The reason why we use the check form is because we want to enter the check number onto the check form. That way we have a record of that in QuickBooks. And also, if we plan on QuickBooks printing a check out for us, well, naturally we have to enter it into QuickBooks first. Otherwise, it's not going to be able to print that check, right? So that's why we use the check form. But otherwise, we can just use the expense form. Now, the great thing about QuickBooks Online is that the expense form, you can enter it manually, but you can also just download it directly from your bank. We'll talk about the method for doing that very soon. Now, there could also be a situation where a vendor does give you a number of days to pay. Somebody sends you a bill telling you how much money you owe and when you owe it. So in that case, what's usually best to do is do something called tracking accounts payable. Accounts payable is a record of what you owe your vendors. So whenever you record a bill that you owe to a vendor, accounts payable goes up. And then later on, whenever you eventually pay that bill, accounts payable goes down. That allows you to track the amount of money that you owe your vendors at any given time. It also allows you to better manage your cash flow, to make sure that you always have enough cash on hand to pay the bills that you owe, and also to make sure that you're just paying your bills on time, because there are some great reports that QuickBooks has on hand that if you use bills, you can make sure that you pay everything when you're supposed to pay it. So those are the two main workflows in QuickBooks. Now, we're going to first talk about this section, this no section. So we're going to presume in these next couple of examples that I'm going to give you, we're paying somebody right away, okay? So I'm going to go back into QuickBooks right here. Now, when we're dealing with situations where we're paying somebody right away, there are two primary transactions, checks and expenses. Now with checks, it is important for you to record those manually. And the reason why that is the check number, and also if you want to print the check out. So we're going to enter that by clicking on the Create menu and then underneath Vendors, choosing Check. Now I know what a lot of you might be wondering is, what if we use online banking? Do we really need to record these checks manually? And the answer is, you should. You don't have to, but you really should because of that check number, because you cannot download the check number from the bank. All the bank knows about is whether or not the money is going up or down. And so whenever it sends those transactions into QuickBooks, all it really tells QuickBooks is money goes up or money goes down. It's the story of my life, right? Money goes up, money goes down. So in the check window, if we enter this manually, we're able to get a little bit more information into QuickBooks, which is kind of what we want, especially concerning the check number. So right over here, if I'm entering a check, and I'm going to say that this was a check that I wrote at the beginning of the year, and I'm sort of trying to catch QuickBooks up to the fact that I entered a whole bunch of transactions in January, but I never got around to entering them, okay? So right in here for the payee, I'm going to enter who I wrote the check to. So I'm going to enter Tim Phillip Masonry. Now I wrote this check out of the checking account. And don't pay any attention to that. That's just a purchase order that we have outstanding with them. So we wrote this check out of the checking account. We wrote it back in January. We wrote it on January 23rd, 2019. Again, we're trying to, catch QuickBooks up to where we're at right now. And we wrote this check for job materials. We're going to put in decks and patios. You can, of course, write in a description right here to get a little bit more detail, and then enter the amount. And the amount of this transaction was $680. Now, if this was something that we need to assign to a particular customer, we can enter that right here in this field. We can also mark it as billable to that customer or project. That way we're going to be able to include this particular expense later on an invoice that we send to that customer. So those are options. We can also enter a markup. If you don't see these on your screen, I'll show you here in a little bit where you can find them in your settings. So stay tuned. I'm going to get to that here in a little bit. Now down here, we also have a memo, which you can enter, which if you're trying to print the check out, will print in the memo field of the check. And if you have a receipt or a bill or anything that you want to attach to this transaction, you can drag and drop it right into this box. We're going to do that with a bill a little bit later on. It's very simple and very easy to do. Up here at the top right, we also see the check number. Now, if this was a handwritten check, we can enter the check number right here. So that's the check number that we saw on that check while we were giving it to Tim Philip Masonry or putting it in an envelope or something like that. But if we want to print this out, we can check off print later and put it into our check printing queue. That way you can print off many checks at the same time. That's what I'm going to do right now. But the process for saving this is the same regardless of whether you're entering a handwritten check or a print later check. You'll just end up clicking on Save and Close, which is what I'm going to go ahead and click on right now. Now, I know that I'm telling you that this is a historical transaction, and it was, but I'm doing this just as an example of what to do if you do want to print out a check. So hopefully everybody can sort of restrain the disbelief a little bit here and just go along with me with the example. So if you do want to print out a check, you've marked it as being printed just like I did. I'm going to go up here to the Create menu, and then right here under Vendors, click Print Checks. Now, the first time you go into this window, you're going to see this, which is basically going to ask you to do a couple of things. First, it's going to ask you what kind of checks you print, so voucher style or standard. We also have B, you're going to load some blank paper into your printer. Be sure to take that check stock out, right? And then also click on this button and print out whatever pops up. And this is going to be basically a check, and we're going to print this out. It's not a real check, but it's just going to basically print out the monetary amount where it's going to eventually appear on the checks that you eventually print out of QuickBooks. And so you're going to hold this and your check stock up to the light to see where it shines through. So that way you know that it's going to print out in the right spot on your checks. If it doesn't print out on the right spot, click this button right here, and you can change the alignment for QuickBooks Online. Now we're going to say that it printed out just fine, and we have to go back here and print checks again. So here's that check that I told QuickBooks needed to be printed, and I'm going to go ahead and print this one out. Preview and print. So it's got, oh, whoops, tells me that check number 1 was already used. I'm going to go ahead and say that that was a mistake, but it's still a good thing for you all to learn, which is that if you try to enter the same check number twice, QuickBooks will stop you. So that's a good thing to know about. I'm going to go ahead and enter the real check number that I meant to type in here that I want to print out. It's number 78, and then we'll preview and print. And then here is the check that we're printing out. We'll go ahead and print that. And then as soon as we do, it's going to ask us if it printed correctly. We'll click Done. So it goes off of the check printing queue. Now, a lot of you may worry that this transaction, once it clears, is then going to be downloaded from online banking, and it's going to show up twice. So we're going to have the manually entered transaction, and then we're also going to have the downloaded transaction. But I'm going to show you online banking very soon. There's actually a process by which you can match the downloaded transactions to the manually entered transactions to make sure that they don't get recorded twice. Now, this is the process if you're just paying somebody with a check and there's no bill involved. But what if you're paying somebody with something other than a check? Electronic funds transfers, debit cards, credit cards, anything that's not a check. How do you record it? Well, if you want to, you can record it manually. You can go up here to the Create menu and then choose Expense. There's nothing wrong with this. And in fact, in some cases, like if you're buying inventory and there's no bill involved, it's probably a good thing for you to go in here and enter this manually. But for the most part, you don't really need to go in here unless you're just choosing to not use online banking. Most of you are going to use online banking. But for those of you who aren't, you can enter the payee, so who you paid with the transaction, where the money came from, when the transaction occurred, the payment method, so debit card, cash, credit card, things like that. And then down here, you can enter what you spent your money on. Perfectly fine, perfectly reasonable to do, and then you save it and close it, and that's it. Most of you, though, are going to be using online banking, which means that you can download those expenses very quickly and very easily. And so that's what I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do right now. I'm going to go over to banking and then click banking again. So signing up for online banking with QuickBooks Online, very quick, very easy to do. All you have to do is go into this banking center. You'll see a link in here that you can click on to connect your bank account with QuickBooks. Even if your bank credit card, when I say online banking, I'm including credit cards in there, or your credit union, even if they don't support QuickBooks Online, which is rare, you can still go to your bank credit card, credit union's website, and then download the transactions in the form of an Excel file, and you can upload those transactions to QuickBooks manually. You can actually do that right through here if you click on the gear icon and then choose Import Data. This also works if you want to go really far back in time and download a whole bunch of transactions from your financial institution and then bring them into QuickBooks really quickly and easily, because right here we have bank data. All you have to do is click on that, and then you can choose to select the file that's on your computer, or you can also connect to your bank. But we're talking specifically here about downloading transactions from your bank and all that. So you can browse here and bring it in. Because whenever you first sign up for online banking, you're going to download the last 90 days worth of transactions. It's probably the case you want to go back further than that. You probably want to go back to the beginning of the year. So all the transactions that QuickBooks doesn't pick up whenever it first connects to the bank, you probably want to go to your bank's website and download those transactions and upload them right through here. Now, all these transactions go into your banking center. And I like to refer to the banking center, it's kind of a waiting room for transactions. This is where transactions go. They're hanging out. They're not really doing anything particular. They're just waiting for us to tell them where to go. And so all of these transactions represent a different situation in which we've either spent money or received money. Just like I said earlier, the bank doesn't really tell QuickBooks why the money was spent. All it tells QuickBooks is whether the money went up or down. So that's pretty much what we're seeing right here. Now, for some of these transactions, like right here, we have a transaction with A1 backhoe rental for equipment rental. So I can click on that. This is a brand new transaction. I have not recorded this one manually. It's just something that I downloaded from the bank. Now, whenever the bank sends this data over, it says bank detail, and it has A1 backhoe rental. You'll probably see a lot more information down here. You'll probably see the address of the vendor and things like that. Now, this tells you normally who you spent the money with, and usually that'll end up being the vendor. What happens here is QuickBooks actually learns as you record transactions regarding a particular vendor or customer, and it essentially takes the information you enter right here and it associates it with future transactions with that same vendor. So I'm going to show you how that works really quickly. Because notice that not only do we have this transaction with A1 backhoe rental, but we also have another one a little bit later on that's for $800. So the things that I enter right here are actually going to also affect this transaction down here. So I'll show you how that works. So right here for the vendor, I'm going to put in A1 rental. Notice that as I put in A1 rental as the vendor or payee, right here, it also pops up down towards the bottom. So it's learning as I'm recording this information. We've got equipment rental, that's the category. That's basically me telling QuickBooks why we spent the money. So we spent money on equipment rental, so that's the category we're going to use. You can change that though, just click the drop down arrow, choose whatever you need to associate the account with this transaction. Right over here, we also have billable and customer. I'll show you where those are at in the expense settings a little bit later on. And if you have any other information that you want to include on here in the memo, just enter it right here in this field. Now, there's also one last little thing I want to mention, which is add attachment. You can click this if you've got the receipt somewhere on your computer or your phone and you want to put it into QuickBooks to categorize that along with the transaction itself. So that's really helpful, by the way, because whenever you're talking to your accountant later on, hopefully, at the beginning of next year, and if they ever need any source documents, they'll be able to just open up QuickBooks and see them right in there, because anything you upload is accessible to anybody else who has access rights to those sorts of transactions, which your accountant would. So they don't have to ask you for those documents anymore. They're right there in QuickBooks. It's basically like a huge filing cabinet, which is really cool because it really helps you organize things, honestly, a little bit faster than a filing cabinet does. So I'm going to go ahead and record this. We're going to click on add. And as I record this, I want you to keep an eye on this transaction down here with A1 backhoe rental for the $800. So I'm going to click add. And as I do so, notice that this transaction turns green. So what that means is that now QuickBooks understands what this transaction is for, because we've now downloaded a transaction and added it for this particular vendor. So whenever I click on it, it now knows to use this category, and it's a lot easier for me to add transactions for that vendor later on. And I'll show you why here in one moment. Now, right here, we also have this transaction that happened on 1/25/2019 with Tim Philip Masonry. It sounds familiar, right? Check number 78. That's the check that we just wrote that happened on 1/23/2019. You know how I mentioned earlier how if you record something manually and then once it clears the bank, you download it, you can still make sure that it doesn't get entered twice? Well, with that transaction that I just recorded a moment ago, I clicked add. That was what I saw here up on the screen. If you download something from the bank and QuickBooks looks through your history and it sees that you've already recorded it, it doesn't give you an add button. It gives you a match button, which means that you're matching the downloaded version of the transaction with the version that you've recorded. That way they get linked together so that they only get counted once instead of twice. So right in here, we can see that we downloaded a transaction from Tim Philip Masonry on 1/25/2019. So it cleared the bank a couple of days after we wrote the check. That's normal. And then we also see that the transaction was for $680. The bank detail was Tim Philip Masonry. Now it took all that information, looked through our history, saw that we had already recorded it on check number 78. Check number 78 was recorded on 1/23/2019 for $680. The first thing that QuickBooks looks for these transactions is monetary amount. If the monetary amount is different from the downloaded transaction versus the one that we enter manually, you're going to have trouble matching them because it wants an exact match. So if something doesn't match up, go back to the historical transaction that maybe you recorded manually and make sure that it's for the same amount as the downloaded transaction. That'll make sure that it doesn't get counted twice. Because right here, if I click on match, that clears the transaction out of this list, and it basically is confirming with QuickBooks that yes, we really wrote that check and it got cashed. So next time, whenever we run a reconciliation, it'll show up as pre-reconciled. By the way, if you want to learn about reconciliations, I highly recommend attending our Master Your Accounting class. That's going to teach you all about reconciling your accounts. Really important process to do every single month for all of your bank accounts and credit card accounts. So that's how to deal with a new transaction expenses or a transaction that you've already recorded. Now we've talked so far about bank accounts, right? So this is a bank account that we're looking at right here. This is our checking account. I want to mention one little thing right here since I'm sort of in the area. I noticed right here that we have a bank balance and also an in QuickBooks balance. This is something that causes a lot of questions among people who first start using QuickBooks Online Banking. They see a difference here. There's a big difference in my company because this is a sample data file. So we sort of uploaded a whole bunch of data and we don't have a real bank account connected. So that's why it's saying $0. But it's actually normal for this number to be different from the in QuickBooks number because the bank balance is what the bank thinks we have. The in QuickBooks balance is what QuickBooks thinks we have. It's okay for those two numbers to be different because it could just be that we just haven't recorded some of the transactions from the bank into QuickBooks yet, just like we have right here, as a matter of fact. So if you see transactions in here, that's probably one of the reasons why there's a difference. Also, if you have outstanding checks, Those are checks that QuickBooks knows about, so they're affecting the QuickBooks balance, but they're not affecting the bank balance. So that's another reason why these two numbers can be different. But this number right here is definitive. It tells you how many transactions are waiting for your approval here in this banking center. So that is pretty helpful to see that. Now, I want to explain credit cards a little bit because credit cards work in mostly the same way as bank accounts. Right over here, we have a MasterCard. So if I click on it, I can see the transactions that are connected to our MasterCard account. Connecting a credit card account is exactly the same as connecting a bank. All you got to do is click Add Account, enter your credit card's information, not the number or anything like that, but just who you have your credit card through and your username and password that you usually use to log in, and it'll download transactions right here into QuickBooks. And you can add these into QuickBooks just like we did through our bank account. So if you download, say, a situation where you've bought some job materials from Hicks Hardware, right here we bought $67.80 worth of job materials. We downloaded this for our MasterCard account. We click Add, that's going to add it into QuickBooks. And also, whenever you eventually pay your credit card, you'll download that as well. Notice right over here that I have in my banking or in my bank account, I actually have a transaction in here in which I paid that MasterCard. Let me see if I can try to find it. I know it's in here. Oh, there we go. Here it is right here. So in this case, I paid the MasterCard on 1/5/2019. It says that I spent $657.12. This is kind of where it gets a little bit crazy because the bank account says that I spent $657. The MasterCard account says that I received $657. See how it pops up on both sides? Well, you know, people see that and they kind of worry, oh no, is it going to get entered twice? And the answer is again, no, because we're able to match these two transactions against one another. All we have to do is select the transaction on either side. It doesn't matter which one. Go to the transaction. We've got that. Let me see if I can find it again. We've got the transaction, $657. I know I went past it there. Where is it? We've got 657. Let me see if I can find MasterCard. There it is. That's an easy way to find things, by the way. Press Control F, and then you can enter the little name right there that you're looking for. I should have done that to begin with. So we've got our MasterCard transaction right here, $657.12. And right in here, this is the select the transfer account. You can also enter this as an expense type of transaction with an add, but I'm just going to use this as a transfer. Either way is fine. And I'm going to go ahead and put in the credit card. So MasterCard credit card, click record transfer. Transfer is just the movement of money from one account to another. QuickBooks isn't actually moving anything. It's just recording the record of that happening through, because you probably went to the credit card's website or something like that and paid it through there. So we'll record this transfer. And then because we don't want it to count twice, I'm going to go over here and check on my MasterCard account, and yep, there it is, one record found. So now this transaction is no longer an add, it's a match, because now QuickBooks understands that this transaction needs to be matched to that one that I just recorded. So I'll click match. Those two get entered into QuickBooks, but they get entered as one single transaction. I'm going to go ahead and show you that. Click my drop down arrow right there, and there is the transfer. So even though it showed up on both sides, I added it on one side, matched it on the other, and so it only shows up as one transaction. It doesn't get counted twice. So that's how to deal with most of the situations that you'll find yourself in with expense type transactions. So anything that does not involve a check. So you've got credit cards, debit cards, things like that. Now I mentioned a little bit earlier that I was going to show you where you can find those settings for telling QuickBooks about an expense that concerns a customer or a project. Let me go ahead and show you where those are at. So I'm going to click on the gear icon and then go over here to account and settings. And we'll wait for this to load. It's going to be in the expense settings. So we'll just click on expenses over here on the left-hand side. And it's right here under bills and expenses. These are all the settings that are concerning bills and expenses in QuickBooks, the money out transactions that we're talking about today. We've got things like track expenses and items by customer. That's what gives you the little drop-down box where you can enter the customer or project's name, and also make expenses and items billable. So that gives you a little checkbox. So that way you can tell QuickBooks whether or not you want to include it later on an invoice to that customer. Also, you can choose whether or not you ever mark up these expenses. And then you've also got some other settings down here, like whether or not you want to track the billable expenses as income or not, and whether or not you want to charge the sales tax that you were charged for those items, and also the default bill payment terms. We're going to get to bills here really quick because we have talked about checks, we've talked about expenses, we've talked about all those different situations in which we pay people right away. What we have not talked about are the situations in which a vendor sends us a bill telling us when to pay and how much to pay later on. So let's talk about that a little bit. This has to do with an account called accounts payable. Now, accounts payable is something that you can track by going over to the vendors list, because when you click on vendors, you'll see all of your outstanding open bills right here. This is the total amount. If you click on this little link, it then filters out your list of vendors just to show you those vendors that you owe money to. It'll also show you your open balance with all of those vendors. Now, if you want to see just the ones that you're overdue with, hopefully it's none, you can see that too. For us, it's the same thing. That's not so good. But this is one of the advantages to entering bills into QuickBooks. And we're going to get into a couple of the advantages of why you would want to enter bills into QuickBooks, because it seems so fast to just download things, right? And to enter checks. Well, it is fast. But the drawback to entering things quickly is that you don't get to enter quite as much information about those things that you download as you would if you enter them manually sometimes. And that is definitely the case with bills. Now, let's say, for instance, Brosnahan Insurance Agency right here sends us a bill. Currently, we owe them $241.23. So we're not paying them right now. We're going to pay them later on whenever that bill comes due. So I'm going to go up here to my Create menu and then choose underneath vendors, bill. So the bill is a record of us owing money. Usually there will be a physical record of this, or they'll email you this bill. So right in here, we'll put in Brosnahan Insurance Agency. It fills in their name and their mailing address if you've already entered that. It also fills in the terms. Now the terms are the number of days that you have to pay the bill. So if they give you terms of net 10, that means that you have 10 days to pay that bill. But you can click your drop down arrow right here and you can choose something different. And whatever you choose, it'll automatically update the due date for you right there. So you don't have to do that math. Though it's not too tough, but I sometimes have a little bit of trouble adding up days for whatever reason. Now, right in here for the category, this is what we're being billed for. So in our case, we're being billed for insurance. So I'll put in insurance right there. And then a description of the insurance. So we'll say that this is for general liability insurance. Oops, there we go. Perfect. And we're going to say that we're being billed for $1,000, just to make it a nice round number. Now up here we have the bill number. So this is the number that you're going to see up at the top right or the top left of the bill. And this tells you basically the unique number. And it's always a good idea to record this into QuickBooks, because there's actually a setting within QuickBooks that'll make a warning pop up if you try to enter the same bill number from the same vendor twice. That keeps you from paying the same bill over and over again. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in. This will be bill number, oh, what do I have the bill number as? This is actually important because I'm going to bring up a PDF form here in a moment. So this will be bill number 160. Perfect. So we'll put in bill number 160. There we go. Now, down here in the memo section, we can enter any notes for ourselves. And then down here under attachments, if they've sent you a PDF document, or if they sent you a paper bill that you scan into your computer and you get a PDF or a JPEG or something out of it, you need to upload that. It's really nice to have those on hand in QuickBooks. And I'm going to go ahead and show you why. Because right here, all I have to do is find the bill, find the PDF, drag it over here into the attachments area, release my mouse button, and then now it is uploaded to QuickBooks. All I have to do is click on this link and it'll open up that PDF in another tab right up here at the top of the screen. So I don't have to go look through my email for it. I don't have to go look through filing cabinet for it. All I have to do is look up the vendor's record and it's right here. Or search for their name, because there's a little search field in QuickBooks. You can find things really fast, really easily. It's another big advantage to entering these attachments into QuickBooks. Now, again, this is a record of us receiving a bill on a certain day. And I'm going to say that we received this bill Yeah, okay, 1/23/2019, and the due date is 2/7/2019. So we'll save and close that. Now that tells QuickBooks that we owe them that money. Our balance has now gone up to $1,241.23. One of the big advantages to recording bills is to know how much money you owe. Well, right here we can see that advantage right here on the vendors list, right? So it's very plain and very easy for us to see. In addition to that, we also get reports. So there are AP aging reports. And with accounts payable, oh, I gotta actually look for AP. Hold on. Nope, it is accounts payable. Maybe I just spelled it wrong. There we go. So accounts payable, we've got two accounts payable reports. There's summary and detail. Now the summary report shows you all the different vendors that you owe money to, and also whether or not you're overdue on those balances. So right in here, we've got a list of different vendors that we have open balances with, and all the current balances, so that's the money that we're not overdue on, and anything that we are overdue on, it'll tell us where in the range of overdueness we are. I don't know if overdueness is a word, but I'm gonna make it up right now. So overdueness between 1 to 30 days, 31 to 60 days, 61 to 9 days, 91 and over, and also the total. What's nice about this is you can click on any one of these balances and it'll zoom right into the transaction that makes up that balance, or multiple transactions if that's the case. Now there's also an AP detail report, and the accounts payable, I'll do it right this time. The accounts payable aging detail report shows the individual bills right up front. So instead of organizing everything by vendor, it instead organizes by how overdue things are. Again, hopefully they're not overdue at all, right? So we're able to see all of the open bills right in here. And of course, we can also click on any one of these open bills to go and zoom into them to check them out. Now, when it comes time to pay bills, you've got a couple of options. If you plan on paying a bill and actually paying it with a check, or if you plan on using a credit or paying multiple bills at the same time, any one of those situations, it's usually a good idea to enter it manually. Because if you download a transaction from the bank and it has an amount that doesn't match exactly with every single transaction that's going on in QuickBooks, it can sometimes cause some problems. And I mention that specifically because if you're paying two bills at the same time with one transaction, whenever QuickBooks downloads that one transaction, it really doesn't know to match it up with multiple bills. So that's kind of why it's important for you to go into the pay bills window. Now, if you're paying bills one by one, if you're paying with a debit card, a credit card, anything other than a check, you're okay. You can download those. But I want to show you how to do it manually. I'll also show you how to do it through the banking center. So right in here, we have the pay bills window. This is where you can tell QuickBooks about those bill payments. Notice that we have, let's see, Brosnan Insurance Agency and also another Brosnan Insurance Agency. So if you're paying two bills at once, you can check them both off, and it'll combine both of them into a single payment. Again, that's why it's important to enter these transactions manually if you're paying more bills at the same time than one, because whenever QuickBooks eventually downloads this $1,200 transaction from the bank, it won't know that it's for two different transactions. It's not going to understand that. So this is why we have to tell it more about it. Now, up here, we're able to tell QuickBooks about how we paid it. So the payment amount, or the payment account rather, the day that we paid it. We're going to go ahead and say that we paid this one on time. So I'll say 01/30/2019. And then if you want to print this out as a check, you can, or you can also enter a handwritten check number. You could even type in debit right there if this is a debit card transaction or something like that. You can write in pretty much whatever you want to. So once you're done, save and close, and that tells QuickBooks about us paying that bill with our checking account, and we'll notice that it no longer appears here. In fact, two bills no longer appear here. Now, what if you enter a bill and you download a payment for it? Well, I'm going to enter one more bill right here. I'm going to enter a bill that is for, let's go ahead and see. I'm going to go ahead and find one really quick. Let's say that we download a bill, whoops. Or let's say we're going to enter a bill manually from Books by Bessie. Okay, so Books by Bessie sent us a bill. So I'll go up here to my Create menu, enter bill. We're going to say Books by Bessie billed us, and billed us for some bookkeeping. and it was for $55. They billed us on 1/23/2019, and we needed to pay it by 2/2/2019. We're going to go ahead and enter the bill number right here. Very good. So we're going to enter this bill number 800 from Books by Bessie. We'll save and close that. We're going to say, hey, we owed Books by Bessie that money. She sent us the bill, and we put it into QuickBooks. Now, if we pay Books by Bessie through debit card, credit card, electronic funds transfer, anything that doesn't involve a check, and it's also us paying it by itself, we don't need to bother with the Pay Bills window. Because look at right here. We downloaded a transaction that took place on 1/30/2019. QuickBooks saw that it was for $55, and it matched it up with that bill from 1/23/2019. So again, this is the matching effect happening. This is the making sure that we're not entering the same transaction twice. So again, as long as the transaction is for the same amount and all of that, then you're going to be able to record everything you need to in here manually, download the transaction later. This is mostly useful for checks and for bills because, whenever it comes to bills, the bank doesn't know who you owe money to unless it's the bank, right? They don't know that you owe money to Home Depot or the vendor that you bought inventory from. They don't know those things. They only know when you pay them. So your bills are your way of telling QuickBooks about money you owe. The bank doesn't know that you owe, or that you're gonna, it doesn't know that you've paid it because you haven't paid it yet. So we've got this bill in here. We can just click on match, bring that into QuickBooks, and that's it. Now earlier I told you that entering vendors' information in here, like the one that we did with A1 backhoe rental, is going to pay some dividends. And this is where I'm going to show you how that's going to work. So I entered this transaction earlier for A1 rental. It was for $1,200, and QuickBooks turned this transaction green. It also turned this one green, Hicks Hardware, because I entered it in the MasterCard side. Now the advantage to this is that the more transactions you enter with these vendors over time, the more you're going to see show up as being green. And also, any transactions that are downloaded from your bank that are recognized as things that you've already recorded, like checks that you've already told QuickBooks about, or these are transactions that are matches with open bills. These are all what are considered recognized transactions. And if you ever want to go in here and save yourself a lot of time, you can open up the Banking Center and then click Recognized, right up here at the very top. And basically what this is doing is it's telling you about all of the transactions from vendors that you've recorded transactions with in the past. And also it tells you about all of the transactions that are currently matches that QuickBooks knows are really good matches. Now I'm going to show you something that can save you tons and tons of time, because right here with Recognize Selected, we can select all of these transactions at the same time and then click Batch Actions, Accept Selected. It matches and brings in all of those transactions at the same time. I can't remember how many there were right there, but it was a lot, right? I think it was like 13 or so. And now we have very few to deal with. And what's cool about this is that the more you use QuickBooks year after year, the longer that list of recognized transactions is going to become, because you tend to buy things from the same vendors over and over again for the same things. And so that's what you're going to see pop up here in this list. Now, I want to show you another little thing that has to do with the online app, so the QBO mobile app. Now, the QBO mobile app, there are a couple of apps out there. It's actually a lot of different apps out there that connect with QuickBooks Online, but there's only one app that is specifically for the small business edition of QuickBooks, which is what we're talking about right here. And you can find that in the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store. It's free. All you have to do is search for QuickBooks Online. Usually it'll be the very first one that you see, and it'll be the one that says QuickBooks Online Accounting. You want to get QuickBooks Online Accounting. And it might also say QuickBooks Online Accounting, Invoices and Expenses, but it'll always say QuickBooks Online Accounting. It's a free app. You can download it to your phone, and you can record expenses on your phone and also take pictures of those expenses via the receipts that you take pictures of and upload them to QuickBooks at the same time. And I'm going to show you how that works right now. So I've actually got let's see here. Oh, perfect. Here we go. So this is going to be the iOS version of the app that I'm going to show you. But the version of the app for Android is pretty much exactly the same. The only difference is that with the iOS app, notice how there's a plus button at the very bottom of the screen. In the Android version of the app, the plus button is up at the top right. So that's really the only difference between the two in terms of their functionality. So if you're using an Android, keep that in mind. The plus button will be up at the top right. So we're going to go ahead and look at this demonstration. I'm going to show you how it is that you can record an expense while you're on the road and you need to enter a receipt into QuickBooks. So the first thing we're going to do is click on the little plus button. It's the same thing with QuickBooks itself, and then we'll choose expense. Up pops the expense form. We'll enter how much the expense was for. Now you also need to tell QuickBooks how you spent the money. We got credit, check, or other. Other is what you would choose if it's a debit card or really anything other than credit or check. So right here, we're able to choose our checking account. Now, QuickBooks assumes that this is a transaction that occurred today, but you can tap on the date right here and make a different choice if you need to. Now, underneath the date, you also have who did you pay. It's not required, but you can tell QuickBooks about the payee in this transaction through this list. This is your list of vendors. You'll also see your customers in here, but usually these transactions will be with your vendors. We'll choose Joaquin's Hardware Emporium. And then what kind of expense is this? This is where it's asking for the category that you find on your chart of accounts. So right in here, we're able to choose what we spent our money on. So we'll choose some job materials and then who was it for? So if this was for a particular customer or project, you can tap on who was it for and tell QuickBooks about that. So right here, we're able to choose a particular customer or not. We could also toggle on or off the billable little toggle that's right there. Now, scrolling down, if there's anything else you want to remember, any notes you want to take, you can type that in and then add a split. So if this is for multiple things, like lots of different little things, you can add a split to divide it up into different accounts. Now, scrolling up to the top, this is where the real power comes in. Tap on that camera, take a photo, and then you can use the camera on your phone to take a picture of the receipt. And then whenever you save this by tapping save up at the top right, it's then going to upload this transaction to QuickBooks. And it's the same QuickBooks that you access through your browser because it's all through the cloud, it's all connected. And that transaction and the receipt that you just uploaded can be accessed directly through your browser or also through your phone. So you can actually see it in your phone afterwards as well if you go in and you look at that transaction later on. So pretty cool to be able to record transactions like that directly on your phone or tablets, anywhere where you have internet access. So there's lots of different ways that you can record these transactions. You can also download transactions from your bank just through the banking center. And if you're on your phone, there's also a banking center on your phone. So if you look in the banking center on your phone, you can also add transactions in from there. So I highly recommend downloading this app. Again, it's free. There's no reason not to download it, really, even if you're working in an office and you're not going out in the field or anything like that. The ability for you to snap those pictures of receipts is really useful. Even if you're sitting at a desk, it's a lot easier for you to do that than to take pictures with your phone, transfer them over to your computer, and then put them into QuickBooks somehow by attaching them in here. Just take pictures of them and create the expenses. Couldn't be any simpler than that. So we're running low on time, and I just want to show you a couple of little things here and there because we sort of covered bills, and I told you about a couple of the advantage of bills. I want to show you one more really quick. I'm going to go over here to my gear icon, and again, you don't have to enter bills for every time you spend money. It's only those situations where somebody sends you a bill telling you about money that you owe and when you need to pay it by. But one of those little things that popped up there while I was entering a bill was the bill number. And that's one of the big advantages to recording a bill because it basically is you telling QuickBooks, hey, we received this bill from a vendor. We don't want to enter the same bill twice in a row. Now down here in the advanced section, under other preferences, notice that there's a little check mark for warn if duplicate bill number is used. That's something you always want to have turned on because this allows you to basically double check yourself to make sure that you don't enter the same bill twice. I'm going to go ahead and close this. Oops, Looks like QuickBooks is still thinking really quick. So we'll let it load that up. And then we'll click on, as soon as it's finished, we'll click on done here. There we go. And so remember that bill that we recorded earlier? We actually recorded 2 bills. We had bill number 800 from Books by Bessie. Well, let's say that, somebody becomes a little bit overzealous about entering bills into QuickBooks, and they enter the same bill twice, or at least they try to. So I'm going to go in here to vendors. We're going to say, oh yeah, we received that bill from Books by Bessie way back in January. I'm going to record that one again. So we'll put in Books by Bessie. We'll put in the date. We'll put in why it is we were billed. We'll put in that it was for $55 and that the bill number was 800. So I'll save and close this. And this is the reminder. This is basically QuickBooks telling me, no, don't do this because you've already recorded this bill once. This is another advantage of bills, because as long as we record these bills, it'll always know to look for this number associated with this vendor. And if we try to enter both of these at the same time, again, it'll give us this warning to make sure that we don't do it twice. So that's another advantage to bills. I know that it's extra work, but doing that extra work to be able to see how much money a business owes, and also to make sure that things don't get paid twice or anything like that, that's a big advantage. And so I just wanted to sort of prop up some usage of bills a little bit more, because it's one of the least used features of QuickBooks, but it's also one of the potentially the most powerful. All right, so we're running out of time. Talk to you later on, and happy QuickBooksing.